Hi, I am Sarah Jakes Roberts, and I am so excited to be a part of Ad Council's Sound It Out, Break the Cycle campaign. Let me tell you, when we talk about children and their mental health, the focus is often so much on the children that we miss that before we can even be in a position to shape the minds of the children, we've got to be willing to take a look at our own mental health as parents, as caregivers. And part of this campaign is to really begin to talk about what it takes to show up for our children in a healthy way by first taking inventory of our own mental health. I am excited because I have a 12-year-old daughter, and let me tell you, she has made me really go within myself as I see her growing and evolving as a woman. It's triggered some of my own journeys and struggles in growing up. And so this is going to be just as much for me as it is for you. And I am so grateful that we have some incredible gifts that will add just so much wisdom and perspective in this conversation. We've got Lauren Carson, the founder of Black Girl Smile. We've got Dr. Alfiee. She is a Sound and Ad Council advisor and the founder of the Acoma Project. And my partner in caring for our children and mental health, my husband, Toure Roberts. He is an author, a pastor, an entrepreneur. His new book is coming out, and he's helping me find balance when it comes to this mental health conversation. So maybe, Dr. Alfiee, can you just give us a little bit of background on why this is so important and why you are excited about this conversation?
Sure. So, having worked with the Ad Council on the Sound It Out campaign from the very earliest inception, one of the things that I really value about the work is that they put a focus on those of us who are of color, African American and Latinx specifically, because it's so important, as you know, in our communities, we don't have these conversations as much as we should. And I think the idea that additionally excites me is that they pulled in all kinds of expertise, right? So, not just myself and other psychologists and mental health professionals, but they also have talked with families, right? So the fact that they took the time to really learn from and gain information and gain insight from families is really important to me. And so you put all that together and you also give people opportunities to have conversations like we're having today. And I think what they've done is find a really innovative and useful and helpful way to put this information in front of people, to give them something to think about, to give them opportunities to open up conversations that we all know might not otherwise happen. So it's just wonderful to be here. I appreciate having the opportunity to be with both of you as parents. I'm a parent myself. My kids are 15 and 17. And I'm just really looking forward to this conversation.
I am too. I'm interested, Lauren, what are you discovering about mental health for Black girls with the work that you're doing through Black Girl Smile?
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm very excited to be here today. Just echoing Dr. Alfie's points that this is a really timely conversation. A lot of statistics have come out recently because we've seen a renewed or new focus on youth mental health and specifically minority or marginalized communities' mental health and well-being. And the statistics are staggering. We are losing young people. We know that young people are really struggling with their mental health and well-being, whether that's coping skills, peer conflict, social media impact. So changing that conversation to your point of talking about family mental health, how parents and caregivers can really contribute to the overall well-being of their young people is really important, but also starting to navigate these conversations from an early intervention or prevention side. Um, for too long now, the behavioral health and mental health community has really worked in this treatment and recovery area. And the more we can focus on early intervention, so having conversations, accessing resources, and the prevention side, we're really going to help alleviate some of the longevity, the severity of some of the mental health issues that young people are experiencing, but also how that contributes to the family unit, how that contributes to relationships with our young people. All of these things are things that I'm really excited for us to get into today.
Lauren and Dr. Alfie, I don't know about you, but one of the reasons I am so excited, not just my amazing husband is on the panel, but as a Black man to be a part of this conversation, as a caregiver, as a parent, Toure, I am wondering, what has your journey with mental health been, and why do you think it's so important, not just for women to spearhead this initiative, but for Black men to join the conversation about mental health?
Well, it's an honor to be on the call and having this conversation. And I, like each of you, am excited because it's long overdue, and I know that we've been making strides towards this conversation and gaining insight and knowledge and tools, but you can never have enough. And then, so for people of color, obviously we've struggled with that. Sometimes even the faith community, we've struggled with the notion of, psychotherapy and mental health, everything Jesus can fix, so to speak. And so, and I know all about that. But as a Black man in particular, it runs even deeper. And this is a generalization, so pardon me if I come off generalizing, but it's not cool for men to admit that we have problems, and not only problems, but the notion that we might be struggling mentally is like taboo. I mean, it may be too early in this conversation to tell you a story, but I remember when my wife, this was probably about a year into the pandemic, and it was difficult. I had a lot of pressure with work and some of the other things that I was doing, and Sarah said, maybe there, you need to maybe take a look at your mental health. And when she said that, I'm like, no, because just the word mental health had such a stigma. Personally, I'm like, she's calling me, the C word. You know what I'm saying? And then as we really wrestled there in conversation for a few moments, I realized that I was looking at it wrong. And in the same way that you prioritize your physical health and your any other type of health, why would you not prioritize your mental health? And so I think this is an awesome conversation for Black men to have, because I think we got a long way to go as it relates to awareness and acceptance.
I love that, because you were in your 40s when that word mental health became something that you could embrace and not shun. I'm in my 30s. Dr. Alfiee, I wonder, and you're a doctor, so you're like in this work, you're in the trenches. Did you grow up in an environment where talking about your mental health was just normal, or it was part of the reason why you are Dr. Alfiee is because you wanted to dig into those trenches yourself?
100% the latter. So I'm Gen X.
Okay.
And in Gen X, you can be anywhere from like 40 something to 50 something as a Gen Xer. And we didn't grow up having these conversations. My family's all from the deep South. So I'm just like everybody else who's Black. These are not conversations that we had. And when Toure talks about the C word, absolutely. That word's banned in our house to talk about people. A situation can be crazy. It can be wild, but we don't call people crazy. But I think at the same time, we exist in this dichotomy. Either you're crazy or you're sane. There's no, when I was growing up, there was no continuum, and we're all somewhere on that continuum, every single one of us. And so I think one of the things I really appreciate, I always say this about millennials, absolutely, is that the millennial generation was the one that put it on the forefront and said, no, we got to talk about this. And they led because they were open about talking about their own experiences. And then the generations behind them, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, have just carried the torch. And I think what that's done, to your point, Sarah, is it's given Gen Xers like me and older folks permission, a little bit more permission to say, these are things I struggle with too. So I'll say quickly, I began my career as a professor. And I was a psychiatry professor at Duke, and then I was a psychiatry professor at Georgetown. And for the whole of my career, it's always been about what kind of research can we generate, to Lauren's point, what kind of interventions can we generate to help people understand when there are issues, because y'all know how we do in our communities, right? Think about, like, everybody got their family member. Oh, that's uncle, auntie, so-and-so, they just like that. And just like that means there's probably something going on that nobody wants to touch. Or nobody knows what to do with. And so just being in a place like this, I keep coming back to how appreciative I am of both of you and of Lauren being open about your own experiences, because people watching this beautiful chocolate on the screen and people hearing them say, right, these are things that I've struggled with. We can't say the C word. The C word is what everybody thinks. You either sane or you're not. Hearing those things, I think, really opens the door for people. So the direct responses to your question, absolutely not. I didn't grow up in conversation, and you nailed it. That's absolutely why I do everything that I do right now.
Oh, that I love that. That's like turning pain into purpose, which I think is so necessary when we begin the process, right? Because mental health is going to bring up so many things, which, if I'm honest, I think that's part of the reason why we don't like to dabble in it at all. It's like, I cannot afford to figure out what that shame really is connected to, what that regret and guilt is connected to. And I want to toss this out to everyone. Maybe, Lauren, you can kick it off. But I am wondering, do you think that the journey of mental health is a luxury that Black people feel like they cannot afford to invest in? And if it is a luxury that we must we must invest in, how do we begin to give ourselves permission, like you said, Dr. Alfiee, to pay the cost to discover who we really are and allow that generational mindset and paradigm to begin to shift? So I don't know what I asked, but Lauren, I feel like there's something in there for you to work with.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I think to both of your points, we're starting to see a shift, but we've got to make sure that in a positive and healthy way, we continue down this track of normalizing conversations around mental health and well-being. In thinking about young people and kind of comparing that to our childhoods, and ways that we can show up today. Yes, most definitely, mental health has historically. Granted, when we talk about mental health is something we all have. Too often,
Right.
when we say mental health, we, like you said, we think of it as a luxury. We think of things like therapy, treatment, outpatient facilities, things like that. Yes, to a lot of people, those are a luxury. Those are a privilege. And in many cases, we don't have access to adequate treatment, care, and resources, or even holistic opportunities or options as well. However, let me add the however here. One, I always advocate for self advocating. If you need something, go out there and get it. Find ways to connect with organizations like Black Girls Smile, the Acoma Project. Connect with whoever you need to make sure that you get the resources that you need, because a lot of organizations, a lot of funders, a lot of attention is now being given to the space of focusing on mental health and well-being, especially the mental health and well-being of people of color and youth of color. So reach out, advocate for yourselves, find ways to make sure you have access to those resources, but also starting to normalize what it looks like to lead a mentally healthy life, focusing on our
Mm.
coping skills, our self-care methods. When I heard Dr. Alfie speaking about kind of a little bit of her background and journey, I am a millennial. My dad's actually a physician, but mental health was not something that was readily discussed in our household, but came to find out that mental health issues ran in our family. And this, for me, yes, again, I was on the privileged spectrum of being able to access resources, but I also realized that coping skills, self care methods, these were things that were not modeled for me in the household in positive and healthy ways. And to your point, Sarah, there are ways that we can honor our ancestors, generations that have come before us and have really paved the way, and saying, hey, maybe that doesn't serve me anymore to react to stress, trauma, or anxiety in these unhealthy ways. So us starting to focus on accessing resources, so knowing what resources are available to us, self advocating for various resources. And when I say resources, I mean crisis and non crisis. So accessing things
Mm.
like therapy, group sessions, sisterhood groups, whatever it is that you need to take care of yourself, mentally, but also starting to focus on what are the things that we can do on our own. Because there's a lot that we need to do, even if you are in therapy outside of sessions, focusing on and really paying attention to, are you honoring your emotions and your feelings and your experiences? We talked about how handling trauma, we start to delve into it, can be really uncomfortable. That is a part of the human experience. But starting to
Mm.
work through those feelings and emotions, and these are things that we can model for our young people. I have a 2-year old, and it's kind of a joke in our house that we taught him his emotions too early, because now he goes around telling us all the time that he's sad. And we're like, okay, well, what are you sad? Well, I'm just sad. Because he's 2 years old and he doesn't have the language yet, but starting to model
Yeah.
what it looks like to focus on your self-care, to focus on positive and healthy coping skills. And these are things that we can start to pass down to the young people that we interact with.
Lauren, that reminds me, my daughter Ella. I will say within maybe the last 3 years, I've really been intentional about just my own mental health. I've got a feelings wheel so that I can expand my emotional vocabulary. And now I'm using the feelings wheel with my daughter. And it is nothing for her to be having like a meltdown and say, I need the feelings wheel, and being able to identify her emotions. And so now she's telling me I need therapy. It's really funny that she feels comfortable having that conversation, even though she's 6, because I didn't know anything about therapy at 6. I think one of the things that I really admire about my husband is very early on in our relationship, it became increasingly clear to me how serious he takes his own sense of balance and his own sense of alignment. Like, it would be nothing for him to say, I need to take a minute to myself to recalibrate and to figure out what it is that I need. And I love that about you, Toure. And I just wonder, at what point in your life did you say, you know what, as a parent, as a leader, as a man, there are going to be moments where I need to take a minute and withdraw from my world in order to show up in the fullness of who I am? And I just wonder, at what point did you learn that? From Watts to where you are now, there had to have been some type of transformation that made you say, you know what, I got to be able to take a minute for myself.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is probably pretty unique to my journey, particularly, becoming a minister and a pastor and having to give so much of myself to others, inspiration, faith, etc. And then one day realizing that I was given so much that I didn't have anything for me, and almost begin to look like a hypocrite. How can I encourage optimism, faith, hope, and yet be personally depleted? And so I think that I got pushed into a deeper self-reflection, not only to save others, but realizing that I myself needed savings. And so I begin to prioritize myself, and I realized, and this probably ties very well into the importance of the caregivers and the parents tending to themselves. But I realized, if I was going to be a real blessing and help and support to others, I would need to prioritize me.
Mm. That's amazing, because that being a real blessing is, I think, what we all desire to be, but we never take the time to consider, what is it that I need before I can show up in that. That word blessing makes me just think about all of the stigmas connected to mental health and faith. And, maybe I'm torn. If I don't know, Toure or Dr. Alfiee, I don't know which one of you I want to chime in on this first, but I'm wondering, where is the line between, okay, I prayed about it, now I need to talk to someone about it? Where is that line where my spirituality transcends into something that I really do need mental health support for? And okay, so this is how I'm going to ask you, Dr. Alfiee, what is the line? Where do I need to go from, okay, I prayed about it, into, okay, I need to seek help? And Toure, I want you to speak to, how do I not feel like I am betraying my relationship with God by seeking outside support from a therapist or medication or a support group or whatever I need? So there you go. Now that's all the heat is on y'all for this one. Answer well.
I love it. I love it. It is such a profound and wonderful question for those of us as Black people, because research tells us that in the United States specifically, the 2 racial ethnic groups with the highest profession of regular active practice of faith, whether they're going to a place of worship or not, are African Americans and Latinx communities, like by far. It's like 80% of both of those groups say I have an active faith life. And so we know this is important to us. And for me, we've spent probably with the Acoma Project, the last 20 years working in collaboration with Black faith communities around mental health. And so what we always tell people when we go out, I have a very dear friend, her name is Kathy Williams, who lost a child to suicide many years ago when he was just a 15-year-old. His name was Torian Leandris Graves, and I always honor Torian because, he was a bright light that just left us too soon. And one of the things that Kathy always talks about is she can speak to what that pain feels like from the perspective of a mother. She can speak to what depression looks like in a child because she saw it in her child. And she knew that at some point, what he was dealing with may have been too much for what was available in her particular church. And I'm also going to acknowledge I'm in the DC area. We have a number of Black churches in this area that offer mental health services from the church. And so I think even in those contexts, right, where there's a line that you cross where the help that you've been able to get from your faith community is you place it in a bucket and you fill that bucket. It doesn't mean it was bad help. It doesn't mean it wasn't useful help. It just means that that bucket is filled. And now you got to go get an empty bucket and go over to this other place to get that bucket filled with something else that you need. So that's what we try to tell people. And I think often the line is when you've done everything you can do, you prayed as much as you can pray. I love meditation. You've meditated and rested with God. And I'm not going to try to even get into y'all's territory because that's not my gift. And I'm going to leave that for y'all and be respectful of what you share with us. But there comes a time when you've done everything that you can do. And I know one of you is probably going to say, you got to let God do what God's going to do. And I think that's the point where you go find that professional help, or you go find that other kind of support. So I know you have a really good friend, Dr. Anita Phillips, who has a saying about faith. I'm not even going to try to say her saying, but she has it on t-shirts about one is a weapon, right? Something is a weapon in therapy, something.
Prayer is a weapon. Therapy is a strategy.
There you go. Right. So that, I think that's one of the mechanisms that I try to use. And going back to echo just briefly what Lauren said, there are many ways, there are many paths that are going to put you on the road to good mental health. They don't all end or all begin with sitting in a licensed mental health professional's office. Many of them begin in the area of prevention, recognizing signs and symptoms. Sometimes it can be just that basic. Do you understand what anxiety, depression, PTSD, do you know what those things look like in Black people specifically? Because it doesn't look the same in everybody. Do you know what it looks like in kids? Do you know what it looks like in adults? Do you know that irritability is often a key feature of depression? But we label it as conduct disorder. We label it as oppositional defiant disorder. Our kids get funneled into different places. So absolutely, when you get to a place where you've done everything you can and you feel like it's not getting better, that's the time that we go get that empty bucket and go put that empty bucket in front of a mental health professional who can help us fill it up and help us get better.
That irritability stood out for me because as a mom of a teenager, there's this line between like, okay, my little sister's irritating me versus everything in my world is irritating me. But husband, I want you to speak to shedding the shame of seeking mental health or medication or support groups or whatever we need in order to fill that other bucket, especially for people who are people of faith and whose spirituality is important to them.
Yeah, that's very good. I've made it a habit to live and to teach the adage of not putting God in a box, particularly a box that is comprised of square walls and stained glass buildings. I think that if it is good and meaningful and helpful and healing, God is somewhere in it. And there's even a passage that says that it is to the glory of God to conceal a thing, and it is to the glory of kings or influential people to search it out, which means that you can't figure God out. But what makes you godly is to continue to search out God. And I believe that if you search out good for yourself and for others, you'll find God in places that you perhaps wouldn't have expected. And I think that the world of medicine and the world of science has God very much in it. And so no shame. Listen, why would a God who loves you not want to see you well? Because you went outside of the church to find well? God has low self-esteem. God has an ego, because you didn't go this particular path. to get what you needed, no, don't be ashamed at all. You have to take what God and life puts in front of you, and if it's going to help, I believe that God is in it.
Amen.
We're gonna have the choir come sing a song. It is okay, and the ushers prepare for the offering because we just went to church here at the Sound It Out campaign. I feel something in the atmosphere. Oh my goodness, that was so good. I've told people, and I can tell you as a person, as a leader in faith, that I am relieved that we are coming to a place where people are comfortable seeking out additional support outside of church, because the truth is I didn't go to school like Dr. Alfiee. I don't know how trauma affects the brain. I don't know how anxiety shows up. So yes, I am limited as a person of faith in that I can pray for you. I can maybe show you some scriptures, but the real work that you need in order to understand your triggers and your communication patterns and all of the things that have happened to you in your life, that is something that is so beneficial when you seek support from people who've been trained to do that. And it sounds like, Lauren, that you've been on a journey. I want to go back to something you said about your 2-year-old. If that's okay, I want to reverse your 2-year-old using that word about sadness, because it just reminded me that that was some training that took place at home. And I want to know, like, specifically and practically, as we're caring for our children, how do we empower them with that language? Do we have to use it ourselves first, or is there some secret code that you can give us? Because maybe maybe we weren't raised learning emotional vocabulary. Maybe we don't have it ourselves, but we want something different for our children. Where do we start with that?
Yeah, I think exactly to your point, and I think everyone has mentioned this modeling. Really showing our young people what it looks like to be open about our emotions, our feelings, our experiences, especially during this time. Like, we're coming out of a pandemic, but these are the times that we can get real with our young people, and we can express. I'm sure each one of us has experienced some stress, some anxiety, even some trauma during this time. We think about trauma too often, to Toure's point, in a box. But we have all experienced a collective trauma. We have probably experienced secondary trauma from seeing various things in the media, different depictions that have shown people who look like us either killed or hurt. So these are all things, taking that opportunity, especially with our young people, a little bit more difficult with the 2-year-old, to have conversations about, how do you feel about seeing this? How do you feel about something that happened at school? Tell me about your experience. Starting to your point, naming our emotions and normalizing that. Too often when it comes to negative emotions, if it's something like anxiety, frustration, jealousy, anything like that, we're like, oh, nope, can't have it. Needs to go away. These are human emotions, but we also can teach ourselves, but also our young people, what it means to sit with those emotions and then let them go. We do not have to let our emotions and our feelings and our experiences define us or take hold of us. But the best way to process them and to heal and to move forward is to be honest about the things that we are experiencing, to find words, voice, to the things that are going on. With my 2-year-old, just sometimes just sitting with him. It's very easy for me as a mother to want to fix it, to run in and fix it as soon as he says he's sad. But just letting him kind of sit with his emotions at times, letting him work through his emotions. That is, even at the ripe age of 2 years old, helping him to develop coping skills. We have even implemented things around his self-care. We know that when he's throwing a temper tantrum and losing his mind, that he likes to take a bath. So it'll be midday and we'll help him take a bath. We'll color. Like, starting to implement these things that calm him, that help him feel centered. And these are things that we can do as adults to take care of ourselves, things that we can model, but also things that we can encourage for our young people.
Oh, that self-care, man. I got chills about that. That's one of the things I'm hoping to instill in my girls in transparency. So Trey and I were a blended family. So he's got two girls that are older than the 19-year-old sons that we share who are the same age. And Dr. Alfiee, I also want to talk to you about this as well, because I'm just wondering, especially for middle school age children, when they're taking in the news, when they're on their phones and their own social media, they're outside of the bubble that we're able to create when they're young, right? Because they don't have as much access to media. And they see the gun violence that's taking place in their communities. They see the disadvantages and the marginalization that especially Black Americans are experiencing, Brown Americans are experiencing. And to Lauren's point, our inclination is to say everything's going to be okay. We want to tell them that they're going to live in this world where what they see on the news won't affect them, but they're too old to fall for that lie. How do we as parents begin to acknowledge the secondhand trauma from news lines or the secondhand trauma from social media in a way that validates that they have a legitimate fear, but doesn't teach them to live in fear? Because I feel like that's one of the things that I struggle with. Like, I don't want you to be afraid, but there are real dangers out there. What can we do as parents to navigate that?
I think that in addition to it being a wonderful question, is something that all of us who are caregivers and or parents struggle with. What's the balance? And the idea, I think I've heard Lauren say this today, the idea that, and I know you said it, Sarah, we have a range of emotions and we want to allow ourselves to experience the full range of emotions. That's why they're there. I'm really active into meditation. And so I've taught my kids that from the time they were really little. I have this amazing picture that I love to embarrass my daughter from when she was about 4. And her hair is like literally out to here, just stand up all over her head because we hadn't done it yet. And she's wearing one of my suit jackets and she's sitting in a chair doing this. And I love it because I knew that it meant that I had given them a gift that they could choose to carry with them for the rest of their lives or not. But I had presented them with that gift. And that is the idea of just being mindful, which is literally just being present. So when I talk with parents, when I work with families, even with young people, what I will say is often fears and anxieties show up because they're important guideposts, right? That fight or flight, that's real, right? You might be in danger and you need to get away. So that fear is your alert system saying, all right, we got to get up out of here. At the same time, we don't want to be hyper alert or hypersensitive or hyper fearful because that's maladaptive. That's not helping us. That makes things worse. So the way that I feel like we can manage that as parents is, as everyone has said, modeling. What are we doing every day to keep ourselves in a relative state of equilibrium so that when those things come, we can calibrate and manage a healthy, rational response to what we're seeing, right? Because I'm anxious. So for full disclosure, I know I'm generalized anxiety disorder. This is it. But the reason I am able to be relatively calm in what I share with people is because I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to manage and create strategies and use tools in my day-to-day life for prevention, right? So my example is when you're anxious, right? When you operate in a state of fear, when you open your eyes in the morning, your brain is doing this. As soon as you open your eyes, you're either worried about something you did or didn't do last night. You're worried about something that may or may not be coming, whether it's real or imagined, but you're not in the moment. And if you can come back to the moment, just be here, right? I'm here with you, beautiful people, right now, right? We're having this conversation. I can see from my peripheral vision cars passing by on the street. Just be here. That reduces my inclination to live in that place of fear, right? Now, some people, we can't deny lived experience that people have been traumatized, that people have these experiences. I've experienced trauma. But I think when we can bring ourselves back to the present, so that's one key. What the other things that I say to parents is curate the news, right? And teach your children to curate your news. I post on social media a lot. And one of the things I post regularly is it is just as important to consider the quantity of news that you consume as it is the quality, right? And so I have an Asian parent at home. This is the last thing I'll say. He sits in front of that TV. We've had many conversations about this. And what do? When they get over a certain age, it's all day news channel. That's not healthy. You can't, it's too much. You can't process all that news, and it's never anything positive. So I say the same thing to young people. I want you to curate your news. They have all these great shows like on Snapchat and some of these other places like Now This, where you can get all the headlines in 3 minutes. That's all you need. Do that and put it down. When your little friends are sharing stuff, you know how we say your little friends, when your little friends are sharing stuff with you, we have these things called sensitivity filters, right? We have these tools called the mute or restrict button. So if you have friends who are always posting that negative stuff, mute them or restrict them. You don't have to unfollow, but just mute or restrict and ask them to use sensitivity filters. So it's this idea of teaching our young people that the full range of emotions is healthy to have them. You want to have them. I have to say this one thing. For us as Black people, you know how they say angry Black man and angry Black woman? I tell people, don't get caught up in those stereotypes. Anger is an emotion. We are Black. Those two things can go together and it's fine. I'm okay being an angry Black woman because when I am the angry Black woman, 9 times out of 10 is warranted. So I think it's this idea of giving ourselves permission to feel all those emotions, to use tools and strategies, as your good friend Dr. Anita says, use those strategies. If you use them enough, you won't get rid of all the fear, but you will train yourself in your brain to have fearful responses than when it's necessary than just kind of randomly.
Sure, I'd love for you to speak into that too, just as a parent, as someone who has experienced some trauma, raising boys. What are your thoughts on how we, honor the feelings and emotions of our children, but also pivot them into living in a place of hope and not fear?
Yeah, I think so much of that has been said. I think what is important for me is to be open and transparent about my own battles with mental health. It was tough for me to even say it. I'm still struggling. You know, but my own issues, and then sometimes being able to relate and say, sometimes for me, it's like this, and it demolishes the wall, the wall of shame, quite frankly. And there's something wrong with me because I struggle with this, and these are some of the tools that have helped me. And even with one of our daughters, one of our older daughters, talking to her and sharing with her, hey, having a difficult time sleeping at night. Hey, I know what that's like to be anxious, to have all these things going on in your head. Hey, sweetie, this is what I do. Try this out. How did that work in the next morning? So I think getting in the boat with them. This is not what you need to do, but hey, we're all on this journey together. None of us are exempt from needing to take measures to make certain that we're mentally healthy. And so I think identification and walking it out together has been a helpful response for me.
Okay, I have a question that's like not on my notes. I didn't prepare for this, but as you were speaking, I felt like it's something that we have to acknowledge as parents and caregivers. How important is it for us to be able to feel like we can apologize to our children when our anger or mental health has shown up in a way that maybe wasn't the best and we have wounded our children? Because I think that a lot of us come from family systems where if your parents snapped at you or your parents said something, you just had to get over it. I'm paying the bills. I had a rough day. You'll get over it. And yet those wounds are legitimate. And I think it keeps us from being able to apologize. It keeps us from being able to acknowledge our hurt and our feelings. But as parents, we feel this pressure to do everything the right way. So what do we do when we know we have hurt our children and wounded our children, but we don't have enough humility to go back and fix it? Anybody?
I can start. I'm a new parent, expecting my second right now. But I think that this goes, thank you. I think this goes for any of our relationships, but really important with the parent child relationship is learning how to apologize. At times we make excuses for our behavior. I'm sorry, but I think to Toure's point, there's a way to apologize, to acknowledge what has happened, and to provide some context, but not necessarily to make excuses for behaviors or for actions, but also to think about what does it look like to improve. Maybe we come up with a keyword. Like I love keywords, having a keyword that allows us to step away from the conversation. I loved when you talked about how your husband kind of takes a break at times. We all need a break at times, especially in the heat of the moment. So maybe having a keyword that we use, that our young person uses, to take a step away from the conversation so that we can come back with a level head. Um, if you don't mind, I had some quick points from the last one too that I just wanted to
Sure.
add, to Dr. Alfie's point. Looking at, if you have the time and space when you are consuming things on social media, making sure that we have check-ins with ourselves, and that we're encouraging our young people to do check-ins as well. Both mental check-ins, but also physical check-ins are going to be really important for people of color, because too often we hold our stress, trauma, and anxiety in our bodies, what they call psychosomatic symptoms. We have a higher rate of experiencing psychosomatic symptoms, which contribute in a lot of cases to us being misdiagnosed. We'll go into a doctor and say, hey, I'm having headaches, back pain, muscle tension, things like
Mm,
that. So check in with yourself. If you are consuming a lot of things on social media, for instance, with our young people, and you're having headaches, difficulty sleeping, digestive issues, make sure that you're checking in with yourself both mentally. How is this making you feel? How is this
yeah.
content making you feel? How is experience making you feel? But also maybe doing a body check. You know, does my back hurt? Do my legs hurt? Going through and just checking in and seeing if you have the time and space to continue with the content or the consumption that you're on. One of my favorite books that I read when I first became a parent and needed to first be the sleep education. I don't like to call it sleep training, but the sleep education. But I came across the book Parenting for Liberation, and to your point, especially as Black people, and people of color, it is very difficult to navigate parenting from a place of liberation and not fear,
Wow.
especially these days. Like I find myself like very easily something happens, I'm like, oh, my son's never doing that. Oh, they never doing that. But it's like, wait. Well, if they enjoy this activity, what are ways that I can still honor my feelings, my worries, my anxieties, but also still allow them to experience life? And some of the things that I took from that book is, one, we need to start to think about conversations, difficult conversations with our young people, as more of a series. Too often we're like, oh, I don't want to have that conversation with a
Mm,
young person because that's just too heavy. But really, why don't we spread it out? Why does it have to be just one conversation? It can be a
so
series.
good.
It can be something that's ongoing, but also looking for opportunities. There are a lot of TV shows, movies, news articles, blogs, podcasts that talk about things that we can see as an opening. Your child tells you something happened at school. Maybe that's the opportunity to slide in there and start asking some questions around, any topic that you consider to be a little bit more heavy, specifically, looking at things around mental health. Maybe we look for those opportunities, but we start to normalize what it looks like to have these conversations more regularly, but also more casually as well. And it just be something that we
Mm.
work into our relationships with young people. So I know that was a roundabout way of answering your question, but just wanted to, offer some additional tidbits on ways that we as parents can have these difficult conversations with our young people.
You know, Lauren, I have to tell you that I'm glad you took a pivot because you started getting a little too close in my neighborhood when you was talking about apologizing to these children who are living off of me for free. But, I feel convicted now about having these casual conversations about when we don't show up as our best, and when they're maybe showing up and they're not at their best, and how can we begin to normalize it. And I think, to your point, when we have them casually, when we're able to not make a big deal out of it, that it does build trust, right? If we want our children to see this relationship as a two-way street and not just a one-way, my rules, my house, and this is what you have to adhere to, it does open up communication for them to then carry in their own feelings and emotions in a way that feels very open and liberating. I'm going to write that book. It sounds sounds like something that I need to definitely read. But Dr. Alfiee, Toure, I want to know from you all as well, what are ways that we can show up from a place of humility in our relationship with our children that teaches them that we're going to have days where we aren't at our best. We can add the context, but honor the maybe wrong that we displayed in our communication and patterns, and then showing up differently. Maybe you can give us some of your personal examples of having to really humble yourself in front of your children, which I feel like in a Black household is like a big old no-no. Like, we're not humbling ourselves for these children, not as long as you eating and you got clothes on your back. Ain't no humility, but I think we got to do better. And so whatever, teach us to do better.
Yeah, Toure, go ahead.
I think for me, relationship with my children trumps anything and everything. It's bigger than my ego. It's bigger than the fact that we're paying the bills. In this world that they are growing up in, and we've only got them for a short amount of time to shape them, to help them, to protect them, I will do anything it takes to have a healthy relationship with them. And one of the things, I think one of the things that makes that possible is for them to see, especially daddy. Daddy's like hero. Daddy's like this, this massive figure who can do no wrong, who's wildly successful and has all the answers. No, I want to tear that idol completely down. Daddy's human. Daddy's not perfect. Because if daddy's human and daddy's not perfect, you don't have to be. And particularly, we're a high capacity family. And so they're going to have pressure just by being our children. They're going to have pressure to perform on them. I don't want that for them. Like, I want to be as normal as possible. And I can't think of anything that makes you more normal than making mistakes. And then to be being open and honest about the fact that you made a mistake. And to Lauren's point, not saying I know what I did, but no. Hey, straight up, I was wrong. I snapped at you. I didn't listen to you. These were not the right words. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Let's start over.
I love
Dr.
that.
Alfiee, you're shaking your head. I want to tell you one thing that Toure does, like legit, at least once every few months with our children, he sits them down and he asks them, how can I be a better parent? How can I be a better father to you? And that, I think there's already such a power inequity in the parent-child relationship that if we as parents aren't intentional about bridging the gap, it won't be bridged. It literally will not be bridged, which means that we have to ask the types of questions that say, poke holes in me. Tell me where I could do better. Tell me how I could meet you in the middle. And that's one of the things that I admire about what you do, Toure, and Lauren, what you're doing with your baby. And Dr. Alfiee, even as I've heard you speak about parenting, I feel like those are some notes that I can take home for myself. Dr. Alfiee, do you want to speak in at all about that power inequity and showing up from a place of humility with our children?
It's really nothing else to say because it's all been said. I'm going to take notes on that. How can I be a better parent? And I mean, it just is so profound, everything that you all have shared. And no, when the Spirit tells you it ain't nothing else to add, then just don't add nothing else. I'm going to leave. Period on it.
I think what we're really talking about is vulnerability and allowing ourselves as parents, as caregivers, to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm still figuring it out. And I'm not always going to get it right. And this is what I'm learning. And these are the tools that I want to give you. So maybe you don't have to take the same class that I took. And also allowing our children to teach us how we can show up better, specifically as it relates to serving them. Because at the end of the day, I don't know that there's a parent or caregiver alive who doesn't want to serve their children into becoming better. But you don't know what to serve them unless you open up communication and allow them to tell you what they need now. I would like for each of you to just speak to what motivates you with your own mental health. Like in those moments where maybe you're feeling anxious, maybe you're feeling depression, maybe you're feeling joy, but it's foreboding joy and you're trying to cancel it out before it fully arrives. What do you say to yourself? What are your practices that allow you to sit in those emotions and to experience them instead of just shutting them down? Okay, Lauren, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I think to Dr. Alfie's point, mindfulness and meditation are extremely helpful for that. Um, Meditation specifically has historically been something that hasn't felt accessible to people of color. But when we start to, just like we're normalizing this conversation, normalize some of these practices, some of these tools and strategies as well, these are things, I don't need to go to a yoga class to practice mindfulness. I don't need to take a meditation trip to figure out how to meditate. There are tools that we can use, that are very easy, accessible, free, that we can utilize to ensure that we stay present. And for me, that is extremely helpful. A lot of us struggle with anxiety. Dr. Alfie has spoken about that. I struggle with anxiety too and ruminating thoughts. So making sure that I'm practicing mindfulness and meditation and not feeling like I have to push my emotions aside, but find ways to honor them, to even at times thank them. Like, thank you for that worry. That helps protect me. That helps keep me on my toes. But that's not what's serving me right now. And replacing that with gratitude. One of the things, I get stressed out very easily. One of the things my husband does is when he sees me stressed out, he'll ask me, "What are 3 things you're grateful for?" Just in that moment, name
Wow.
3 things that you're grateful for. So replacing some of these negative feelings and emotions with things like gratitude can be really helpful. And then lastly, for me, I think at times I want to get into the victim role. Why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Things like that. And for me to remember that you have to be intentional about your joy. You have to be intentional about your happiness,
Mm.
your health, your wellness. And for me to continue to be intentional, those are things that help ground me and help me get back on the path to making sure that I'm doing the work both personally and professionally to stay mentally healthy and well.
Oh, that's so good. Intentional about your joy. That's a note for me. Dr. Alfie, you got to speak into that as well. What motivates you?
Living in my purpose. I've watched you many times speak about, I'm not going to get it right, but being a purpose driven woman and living out
Yeah.
what God has placed in you. And in these moments, this is when I know this is exactly what I was put on this earth to do. And that motivates me. And I know that the only way I can show up for these moments is to do the other things and use the other tools that help me be present right here. Like, I don't even know what's coming after this, but being right here in this moment. And 10 years ago, I could have told you everything that was coming in the day as soon as I opened my eyes, because I'm always thinking like 15 steps ahead. And it wasn't healthy. I think a lot of that was a reaction to being in toxic work environments, which is part of why I left academia. So I always joke I'm a recovering academic, talk about trauma. That's his own set of trauma by itself, being an academic. Lord have mercy. Thank you, Jesus, for delivering me. But I think the tools that I use to help me do this right here, this is my purpose. In this moment, I can feel the purpose. Our exercise, I'm a gym rat, not so much at the gym anymore, in my house with my Peloton, with my weights, my free weights. And to Lauren's point, meditation and mindfulness, I have a favorite app that I adore called Insight Timer. It's free, but it connects you to people literally all over the world who at any moment when you're meditating may also be meditating. They have this beautiful little map that has little dots that shows you the whole world where people are meditating through those little dots. And that connects me. Yes, it connects me globally. And I just feel like I'm not alone. And then I think one of the big ones for me, given the household I was reared in, is my gratitude for the ancestors and the sacrifices they made to allow me to be here. So being able to be in my office, doing this, running my own nonprofit, working with all of these beautiful people, you two whom I've seen, not to flatter you, but you see people out there in the world doing huge things. Like you said, you're a high impact family, and having the opportunity to be here with all of you. Lauren, I know of her work as well, and knowing that our ancestors couldn't do this. They didn't have these
Yeah.
opportunities. So being here, I am, what do they say? I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I
Yeah.
don't realize that. And that carries me. So those are the things that help me.
Toure.
Well, you mentioned motivation, and for me, better is my motivation. I have discovered that life can be better, that we can be better, that things can move in the right direction, not overnight, but and maybe even thankfully not overnight, but little
Yeah.
by little we can change, grow, and evolve. And I believe that as we get better, everything around us gets better. And so I think that's what motivates me to take my mental health seriously, and to work the tools and to seek out new tools. Ultimately, I just want to be better.
Man, I feel like my answer to that question is probably an amalgamation of everything you all just said. But Dr. Alfie, when you said that part about being my ancestors' wildest dreams, in many ways, I feel like the 13-year-old girl version of me who got pregnant and had her baby at 14 feels like an ancestor sometimes, because my life right now is so far from what that 13-year-old girl experienced in her depression and anxiety, that what motivates me is the fact that I believe that that 13-year-old girl deserves to see the life that she lives in right now. Like, she deserves to be present and to see that it worked out. She deserves to experience the joy. She deserves to experience the fear because she's been afraid before and overcome. And while I know you and ancestors as in generations, I feel like my past traumas and triggers created separate versions of myself. And what motivates my mental health is inviting all of me to be present in the moment that I'm living in now. When I was a young girl, I'm sure there were people who may have saw that I was going through something, and maybe they had the words, maybe they didn't, maybe they said them and I just couldn't hear them. But there's a part of me that feels like I just wish that someone would have pressed in to how I was processing what took place in me in that moment. And so, as our last question for this incredible Ad Council Sounded Out campaign, I want to talk about breaking the cycle of seeing children go through something but not necessarily saying something, either feeling like it's not our place, whether we're parent, caregivers, or just in the village raising those children. What are some signs that a child is maybe going through something, and then how do we show up in a way that supports them in expressing vulnerability and emotions so that they don't have to wait 20 years down the road to experience the mental health breakthrough that we're currently experiencing? Dr. Alfie, go for it. You look like your head is
I
shaking, your head is
That's on my
nodding.
heart. That's on my heart. I don't know that I have a good answer for all of it, but what I will say is one of the things that I always do, I don't care. I shouldn't say I don't care. Every child that I pass, inclusive of all aspects of identity, I give them this is the truth. My kids can't stand it. I'll smile at them and say, "Hey, baby, how you doing?" Because we never know if us just being the person to see them that day might make a difference, right? I may never see that person again, but that child may be living in a world where nobody sees them. And that's what I feel like some of what I'm hearing. So we can physically see kids, but we don't really see them. We don't see their hearts. We don't see what they're experiencing. We don't see the emotions or the pain that they're trying to share with us. So just speaking, let me just speak to you. And if it turns into something, so be it. And if it doesn't, at least I've given you that one little thing, is the gift of acknowledgement, especially for marginalized young people who are so often, that's why we call them marginalized. That's why we're called marginalized. People overlook us. So I would say that. And then the only other thing I would add is understanding signs and symptoms. Know what depression looks like in Black children. Know what anxiety looks like in Black children. Know what signs of exposure to trauma look like. If we can educate ourselves on those things through some of the resources that we have right here on this screen, I think we can go a long way towards helping our young people.
So good. Oren?
Yeah, I think just echoing Dr. Alfie's point, this is a nuanced question, and something that I think we are still working out as a community and a society as well, of making sure that the resources that we are advising are the best resources that are possible. Because, candidly, there have been points where recommendations have been made and they're not the best resources. So we need to make sure that we continue conversations and questions like this to make sure that we are providing adequate and appropriate support for our young people when we are making these recommendations. Because to your point, we can pick up on warning signs and symptoms, but making sure once we make that referral that they're getting to the appropriate resources. But just kind of adding to Dr. Alfie's point, like my thing is I always try to ask people, how are you doing? But in such a way that, I'm not just looking for you to say well or good, and keep it moving, like a lot of us have gotten accustomed to, but really creating time and space that when I'm asking you how you're doing, I want you to feel comfortable opening up. With young people, it takes time to build that trust. These are not conversations that happen overnight. Like you ask the young people, what's going on, and it all comes pouring out. Sometimes that happens, but sometimes, we have to build that rapport. We have to build that trust. And the best ways to do that is to be consistent. If you provide support once, continue to provide support. Continue to say, I'm here if you need me. I'm here if you want to, talk about things. And then the last thing I would add is at times we always feel like we have to have all of the answers. Just responding with, thank you for sharing, that's really brave. That is my favorite saying when I am in a uncomfortable conversation, when someone is disclosing something that's just, kind of beyond my means. You never know what you're going to hear from young people.
Yeah.
And some of it is very jarring. Some of it is scary. Some of it is devastating. But to say, thank you so much for sharing, that was really brave. That is a great way to validate them opening up, them, being honest about their emotions and their feelings. But I would also encourage people, know about some resources that are available in your area, even national resources, ahead of time. When you are making these referrals, make sure that you have an idea of what are some of the resources and referrals that you can make, so that we don't feel like we have to put our cape on and save the day. In a lot of cases, it's just providing that emotional, consistent, empathetic, non-judgmental support. And that is a great place to start with young people, with having them open up about their experiences.
I'm going to borrow a page out of Dr. Alfie's book, and no, really, it has been said. I would just echo and emphasize and underscore and underline seeing them. Making time to see them. Kids, sometimes the symptoms will be withdrawal.
Yes.
Or silence. And withdrawal in particular is kind of, there's a notion of hiding. And sometimes they don't feel seen. So I want to counter that by saying, I see you, and going out of my way and being very intentional about making time just to see you and be with you. I'm going to turn off work dad, or I'm going to turn off businessman. And you're going to be my business. And I just want to see you. And so, again, it's been said, but I would just put a highlighter on making time to see the young people in your life.
Okay, if you underline, I'm going to just add a footnote, because one of the things that I do with our children is I ask them, how's your heart? How's your heart? Like, what state is your heart in right now? And I'm thinking even of my niece, she's like, I don't know. And then I'm like, I break out my feelings wheel, and I'm like, let's pick one. And you can Google feelings wheel, it'll come up, and you can begin to empower them with vocabulary that helps them to understand what they are feeling. You got to feed them what they need so that they can grow into healthy individuals. I want to thank my incredible panelists, Toure Roberts, my partner in breaking the cycle and all of the things in life and in parenting. Thank you so much for adding your perspective. Lauren with Black Girl Smile, we cannot wait to continue to just feed off of the work that you're doing to help empower Black women to show up as their authentic selves, whatever that authenticity means. And Dr. Alfiee, I want to put a square of you in the bottom of life. You are my reaction. You are my emoji memes, the hand raising, the eye roll. I just want to come see everything you're doing with the Acoma Project, just so I can see some more of those expressions. This has been an incredible conversation. I guess it's really not fair to call it a conversation because this is really just a runway. Ad Council and the Sound It Out Break the Cycle campaign wants this to be the launching pad for how you show up for yourself and for those who are under your influence. I am so grateful that the conversation doesn't have to end here because there are so many tools and resources available to you in this video description. You don't have to go and find them yourself, though you can do your own homework. We've done a lot of the work for you. So check out the video description so you can begin breaking the cycle, because we need you. We need you at your fullness. We need you to share this video. We want to break this cycle in our community so that we can create new, healthier cycles that lead to a more fulfilling and rewarding life. Thank you, Ad Council and the Sound It Out Break the Cycle campaign for this incredible conversation. I feel better as a result of it.